Welcome to this explainer. Right away today, we're looking at something incredibly sobering that definitely requires our focused attention. On June 8th, 2026, a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake rocked the southern Philippines. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what happened, the geological facts, the sheer structural devastation, and the deeply human impact of this disaster, using reports straight from the ground. We'll look at the where, the what, and how an entire nation responds to an event of this massive scale. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the scale of a disaster like this, we've got to start at the ground level. Rosabel Quechuela, she's the principal of Mahayahai Elementary School. Honestly, she perfectly captured the emotional weight of this sudden event. She said their excitement on the first day of school turned to trauma. This wasn't just some data point recorded on a seismograph. It was a violent interruption of normal, everyday life, specifically on a day that's supposed to be filled with pure joy and anticipation for young kids. Picture this. It's exactly 7:37 in the morning in the rural town of Melita. You've got over 100 students looking sharp in their fresh uniforms, standing with a dozen teachers for their morning flag-raising ceremony. They're in this school compound right in the middle of coconut trees, literally just getting back from a 2-month summer break. And then, completely without warning, the ground beneath them just starts violently shaking. I mean, you could only imagine the sheer immediate panic that must have ripped through that courtyard. And the physical toll on the school? It was immediate and it was terrifying. A canopy roof just completely collapsed right there on the grounds. A nearby shed absolutely crumbled to the dirt, totally crushing a parked motorcycle in the process. But here is the truly miraculous part. Despite these young kids screaming and crying in total panic, most of them stayed seated and still. The fact that they strictly stuck to their basic safety protocols during absolute chaos, that literally prevented any physical injuries among the students. Just incredible. Section 1. Zooming out, the epicenter and structural devastation.
7.8. That is the massive magnitude of this offshore earthquake. And to put that into perspective, according to the director of the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, this number makes it the absolute strongest earthquake to hit the Philippines this entire year. A 7.8 releases just an unfathomable amount of energy. We're talking enough power to absolutely devastate densely populated areas in a matter of seconds.
Now, another critical factor here is 33. The quake struck at a depth of 33 kilometers. That's roughly 20 miles down. It was centered in the ocean, just off the coast of Mindanao, which is the second most populous island in the entire Philippine archipelago. Specifically, it hit about 32 kilometers southwest of Masim town. So why does that matter? Well, this offshore but relatively shallow depth is exactly why that violent shaking felt on land was so widespread and incredibly intense.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is looking at General Santos. This is a huge port city, over 700,000 people, and a massive regional hub for the tuna export industry. And what we saw here were cascading failures. The devastation was severe. We're talking several low-rise buildings totally collapsing or taking on heavy damage. Search and rescue teams had to be instantly deployed to a supermarket, a warehouse, and a grade school just desperately looking for trapped people. On top of that, the city's international airport completely shut down, scratching 17 domestic flights. And at the time of these initial reports, at least 4 people were missing in this city alone.
To really truly grasp what it felt like on the streets of General Santos, you've got to hear this account from Rod Sosmania. He's a regional director for the Office of Civil Defense, and he was actually traveling through the city when it hit. He said, "Our pickup truck suddenly jerked, and I thought we had a flat tire. The shaking was very strong, and people dashed out of houses into the streets." It's a highly visceral account, isn't it? It really brings that terrifying sensory reality of the shaking right into perspective for us.
Section 2. The deadly gland landslide.
While collapsed buildings and cracked highways are usually the very first things we think of with earthquakes, the raw geological power of a 7.8 magnitude event fundamentally destabilizes the Earth itself, and that leads to severe secondary disasters. In the rural municipality of Glan, out in Sarangani province, those massive tremors triggered a devastating landslide, literally wiping out parts of the community as the Earth just gave way. 13. That is the deeply tragic number of villagers who lost their lives specifically in that Glan landslide. And sadly, 4 other villagers died in the broader Sarangani province too. This secondary disaster contributed significantly to the overall initial death toll, which stood at a heartbreaking minimum of 35 people across the region. It highlights how the specific topography of a rural area can just drastically multiply the danger of a seismic event.
Section 3. The ripple effect. A tsunami strikes. And this brilliantly illustrates the immediate oceanic threat that radiated outward from the epicenter almost instantly. Look at the town of Kiamba in the Philippines. They were hit by a 1.4-meter wave. That's over 4.5 feet of water just crashing ashore. We also see 1-meter waves monitored in Sultan Kudarat and Sarangani, which caused real damage to coastal shanties built up on stilts in nearby villages. And this ripple effect, it didn't even stop at the Philippine borders. An 83-centimeter wave was tracked all the way off the coast of Sulawesi, Indonesia. The sheer vastness of that ripple effect spreading across the ocean is just staggering. On a local level, those 1.4-meter waves caused absolute panic and wrecked vulnerable coastal properties right there in the Philippines. But remarkably, the distant reach was felt way across the ocean. Waves up to 20 centimeters were detected as far away as Shichijima and Kushimoto in Japan. 30-centimeter waves were even measured out in Palau. It is a stark, visual reminder of how a single geological event connects distant coastlines across the entire Pacific. Section 4. The broader context and national response. Now, the mobilization from the central government following the quake was swift. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. addressed the crisis directly, stating, "The national government is moving and we will not leave Mindanao behind." As part of this immediate top-down response, classes were officially canceled across the affected areas, and national disaster response agencies were directed to deploy instantly to the hardest-hit provinces. And this coordinated relief effort, it required a massive, multifaceted approach. First off, you had the immediate deployment of domestic disaster response agencies to handle the critical search and rescue operations. Crucially, seismologists issued strict warnings advising residents absolutely do not return to damaged structures, since ongoing aftershocks could easily bring weakened buildings right down. Furthermore, the response quickly went international. The United States began coordinating with Manila for support, while countries like France, Japan, and New Zealand formally offered international aid to assist in the really complex recovery ops. So, the crucial point is understanding exactly why this keeps happening here. The Philippines sits squarely on the Pacific Ring of Fire. If you're not familiar, this is a massive geological arc of seismic faults stretching all the way around the Pacific Ocean, and it's notorious for highly frequent earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. This 7.8 magnitude quake isn't some isolated anomaly. It's just an inherent, dangerous geological reality of living in this specific part of the world. To truly comprehend the staggering environmental burdens placed on the Philippines year after year, we have to look at the compounding factors. First, as we just saw, they have a highly vulnerable location directly on the volatile Ring of Fire, guaranteeing seismic activity. Second, add to that the fact that the archipelago is battered by an average of 20 typhoons and tropical storms annually. And third, this combination results in constant, grueling cycles of widespread destruction followed by massive national rebuilding efforts. It fundamentally makes the Philippines one of the most disaster-prone countries on the entire planet. Which brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with today. With 20 typhoons a year and constant looming seismic threats, how can Mindanao rebuild for a safer future? As the rubble is cleared in General Santos, and as the communities in Glan mourn their losses, the monumental task of rebuilding has to begin all over again. The resilience of the Filipino people in the face of these staggering natural forces is profoundly humbling, but it definitely demands we ask, what does sustainable, earthquake-resistant recovery actually look like in the Ring of Fire? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep seeking to understand our complex world, and I'll see you next time.